Thank you. So hi, my name is Annie Pursiainen and I'm from the Natural Resources Institute Finland. I did this work together with my co-authors who are listed here, and well, the work was done during my master's studies, so my affiliation was the University of Helsinki at the time. Yeah, well, I will be talking about our work on the reproduction habitats of pike in the northern Baltic Sea. Okay, and on Tuesday there was a lot of talk about declining pike stocks, especially in the southern parts of the Baltic Sea. So I included this map from Jens Olsson's study, which shows the trends of the pike stocks in the different areas of the Baltic Sea. Our study was conducted here in the northernmost part of the Baltic Sea, between the Bothnian Sea and the Bothnian Bay, namely the Quark. And in this area, the pike stocks have not yet shown declines and are rather stable. So this is why the Quark presents a unique area to study the factors affecting successful pike reproduction and to identify productive pike reproduction habitats. Also, the Quark in itself is a unique area. It provides different kinds of sheltered habitats within its complex archipelago. In the Quark, the post-glacial land uplift rate of up to 1 centimeter per year is among the fastest in the world. And this land uplift contributes to the formation of coastal lagoons. And such lagoons are known to provide reproduction areas for spring spawning Baltic fish species, such as the pike. So here is some background information on these coastal lagoons, as the terms flats and glows are probably not familiar to all. Flats and glows are different developmental stages of coastal lagoons. So with time and with the ongoing land uplift, shallow bays are slowly separated from the surrounding sea by an underwater ridge or threshold. And the pre-flats are the most exposed and the first stages of these lagoons. In these habitats, the water exchange is not much affected by the underwater ridge. And after that, the next stages are the flats and the clue flats, where the water exchange gets more and more limited. And the glow lakes or the glows are the most sheltered and the last developmental stage of these coastal lagoons. And in the glow lakes, the threshold is so high up that the connectivity to the surrounding sea is fully limited, and the seawater gets only in occasionally. And as the water exchange with the sea gets more and more limited, the freshwater input from coastal rivers and streams eventually turns these isolated habitats into freshwater ecosystems. And here is the map of the research area, where also the locations and a number of the different habitat types that were included in the studies in this study are indicated. So this study focused on 4 different kinds of sheltered coastal habitats, namely the coastal lagoons, including sheltered bays, pre-flats, flats, and glows, and then separately the sheltered bays. And the sheltered bays represented morphologically the most exposed habitats because there is no underwater ridge or threshold that will limit the water exchange. And the sheltered bays were also mainly located in the inner archipelago compared to the coastal lagoons that were located also in the outer archipelago zones. Altogether, there were 70 sampling sites on the Finnish side and 26 sampling sites on the Swedish coast. So our aim was to provide new information on productive pike reproduction, habitats, and environmental factors that affect successful pike reproduction. So first, we tried to identify the significance of different environmental parameters in the 4 different sheltered coastal reproduction habitats that we investigated. And secondly, we aim to identify the main reproduction habitats of pike by assessing the densities of early stage pike larvae. So the sampling targeted the newly hatched pike larvae due to their higher abundance. So the sampling was carried out during the larval periods in spring in the years 2017, 18, and 19. And the larvae were sampled with a flat dip net, which is shown in the pictures, in nearshore areas with dense vegetation. The larvae were caught by pushing the net into the vegetation underwater and then lifting it up vertically to the surface. And well, all the pike larvae caught in the dip net were counted for each lift. And the counted data of pike larvae was then used in proportion to the number of dip net lifts per sampling occasion, so as catch per unit effort. And here I listed the environmental variables that were used in the study. Some of them like salinity, pH, and the vegetation. Also the occurrence of moss and sticklebacks were determined during the field sampling. And the stickleback observations included observations of both 3-spine sticklebacks and 9-spine sticklebacks. And also the GIS constructed variables, effective wave exposure, shoreline density, and distance to water areas deeper than 20-meter depth were used to indicate the level of shelter of these habitats. And here are the first results for the first questions, and the graphs show the variation of pike larvae abundance in the different habitat types, and also in the rest of the graphs are the variations of the different continuous environmental variables in the different habitat types seen. So pike larvae abundance was highest in the glows, which was also the most isolated and sheltered habitat type. And the high degree of shelter provided by the glows is also seen in the low effective wave exposure index in the glows and the higher high shoreline density index value. And the shoreline density describes the complexity level of shelter and also the availability of spawning and larval habitats in the shore area. And also benefits of the isolated glows are the low salinities and the high temperatures. So with increasing connectivity of the coastal lagoon, also the pike larvae abundances decreased. So pike larvae abundances were lower in flats and the lowest in the pre-flats. And well, this trend is also seen in the variables that were used to indicate the shelter inside these habitats, namely the effective wave exposure and the shoreline density, which decreases towards the pre-flats, and the effective wave exposure increases towards the pre-flats. So with decreased shelter in terms of the habitat morphology, pike larvae abundance also decreased. The shelter base, which represented morphologically the most exposed habitats, show also like quite good pike larvae abundances, and also the variables indicating shelter show that these are in fact also highly sheltered areas, and this is because all the sheltered bays were located to the inner archipelago. So they provided also good habitats for pike larvae. So the relationship between the pike larvae abundance and the environmental variables were tested with the negative binomial regression model, and the variables that remain significant in the model are shown here. Salinity had a negative effect on pike larvae abundance, but the highest measured salinity in this study was 5.4, and thus salinity had most likely only low importance on the occurrence of pike larvae, and it reflected more the morphology of the sampling site. And the site's exposure to wave action had also a negative effect on pike larvae abundance. So as said before, with the increasing exposure to wave action, the shelter decreases and also explains the lower abundances of pike larvae. Shoreline density had a positive effect, and with increasing shoreline density, there are also more complex habitats for the pike larvae, and it makes sense because they are pike do depend on vegetation for spawning and for the larval habitats. And here in the results on the vegetation preferences, they support earlier findings as the pike larvae preferred fall and reed mats in the study areas, and also the occurrence of mosses had a positive impact. And then last but not least, the occurrence of sticklebacks had a negative effect on pike larvae abundance, but our results suggest that the occurrence of sticklebacks was affected also by the morphology of the sampling site, as the more isolated habitats, such as the glows, were generally less favored by sticklebacks. There were only 3 stickleback observations in glows, and also only 9 sampling sites there were sticklebacks and pike larvae observed. So based on these stickleback observations, sticklebacks and pikes seem to have a different habitat selection in the area. But of course, the absence of sticklebacks contributes to the importance of isolated glows as reproduction habitats for pike and also for other spring spawning fish species, especially in the middle and outer archipelago, where the sticklebacks are more likely to occur. So overall, the results of this study highlight the significance of highly sheltered and isolated habitats for pike reproduction in the Quark area. Productive pike reproduction areas do not only benefit from the shelter on a large scale, so from the archipelago gradient, but also and more importantly from the shelter obtained from the close and immediate environment. For example, isolated glows and other highly sheltered larval habitats can have many advantages for the pike larvae during their early life stages. For example, they enable a rapid warming up of the water column during springtime, and they are often covered with dense vegetation, which can be used as spawning substrate, foraging grounds, and as shelter from predation. So again, especially in the outer archipelago zones where the conditions can be very harsh, isolated glows play an important role for spring spawning fish species, and they can also sustain local pike populations in the areas. But of course, there can be also threats that pike can face when choosing isolated glows as reproduction areas. For example, the migration in and out of these glows involve risks of predation, and the migration is dependent on the state of the water courses, such as the water level and vegetation. And the emigration success of the juvenile pike out of these habitats, of course, affects the year class strength of the pike. So to conclude, based on findings of this study, we conclude that the key factor for the reproduction habitat choice of pike is the shelter provided by the immediate environment of the larval habitat, and the degree of shelter is affected by the morphology and the level of isolation of the habitat and the vegetation coverage inside the habitat. and also shell size affected by the archipelago gradient. And of course, based on these results, closed flats and sheltered bays have high potential as pike reproduction areas. And yeah, here are the funding bodies and collaborators of the study, and this study is also available in the Estuarine Coastal and Shelf Science. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Annie. Let's see, we have a question from Antti Vasemägi.